They wanted a reaction. That was the whole plan. They wanted to see you angry. They wanted you defensive. They wanted you explaining yourself, proving yourself, chasing their approval, giving them something emotional they could use against you. But you gave them nothing. You stayed quiet, and suddenly the game changed. Because silence is uncomfortable. When someone was expecting access to your emotions, they can prepare for your anger. They can argue with your words. They can twist your explanations. But when you simply stop participating in the chaos, they are left staring at a situation they can no longer control. You didn't need to announce that you were changing. You didn't need to tell everyone what you were thinking in. You didn't need to expose every wound, every plan, every reason behind your next move. You just became harder to provoke, and that's when people started noticing something different about you. Not colder, just unavailable for the nonsense. They pushed harder because your silence confused them. They expected the old version of you to react the way they remembered. They expected the argument, the paragraph, the emotional response, the desperate attempt to be understood. But you were learning something they never expected you to learn. You don't have to respond to everything that tries to disturb your peace. Sometimes the strongest move isn't winning the argument. It's realizing the argument was never worth your energy in the first place. And once you understand that, your silence stops being emptiness. It becomes discipline. It becomes control. It becomes the moment you finally decide that not everyone deserves access to your mind. They wanted your reaction, not your happiness, not your growth, not your peace. Your reaction. They wanted to see your face change. They wanted to hear your voice get louder. They wanted you to defend yourself, explain yourself, justify every decision, and prove that their words still had the power to reach you. Because some people don't feel powerful because they are strong. They feel powerful because they know how to push your buttons. They know what makes you angry. They know what makes you insecure. They know which subject to mention, which memory to bring back, which accusation to throw into the room just to watch you lose control. And for a while, you gave them exactly what they wanted. You reacted. You answered every accusation. You explained every misunderstanding. You tried to correct every rumor. You tried to convince people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. And every time you reacted, they learned something. They learned where your emotions were vulnerable. They learned which words could pull you into an argument. They learned how quickly they could make you abandon your peace just to prove a point. Then something changed. You got tired, not weak. Tired. Tired of repeating yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Tired of entering conversations that had no intention of becoming honest. Tired of turning your peace into a courtroom where everyone demanded evidence for your character. So you stopped. No dramatic announcement. No final speech. No desperate attempt to make everybody understand. You simply stopped giving the reaction they were waiting for. And suddenly, the same people who felt so confident became confused. Because they were prepared for the old version of you. They knew how to deal with your anger. They knew how to deal with your explanations. They knew how to deal with your emotional messages at 2 a.m. But they didn't know what to do with silence. Silence gave them nothing to fight, nothing to twist, Nothing to screenshot. Nothing to manipulate. Nothing to carry back to somebody else and say, "Look what they said." You became difficult to provoke because you finally understood something simple. Not every battle deserves your participation. Some arguments are designed to keep you trapped inside them. Some people don't want an answer. They want access to your emotions. They don't want clarity. They want control. And once you recognize the difference, you stop wasting your energy trying to win conversations that were never designed to have a winner. You begin watching instead of reacting. You notice who keeps provoking you when you're peaceful. You notice who suddenly becomes interested when you stop giving them attention. You notice who respects your boundaries and who becomes angry because you finally created them. And that's where your silence becomes different. It's not weakness. It's not fear. It's not pretending you don't care. It's choosing what deserves your energy. You can care deeply and still remain quiet. You can be hurt and still refuse to explode. You can know the truth and still refuse to explain it to everyone. That's emotional discipline. The world will constantly offer you invitations to lose yourself. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will criticize you. Someone will try to make you jealous. Someone will question your progress. Someone will expect you to prove that their words affected you. And you don't have to accept every invitation. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Not because you have nothing to say, because you finally understand that your peace is worth more than the satisfaction of having the last word. When you stop talking, people start talking for you. And that's where things get interesting. Because as long as you are explaining yourself, people can interrupt the story. They can question your intentions. They can twist your words, challenge your motives, and turn a simple explanation into another argument. But when you become silent, you remove the material they were using to construct their version of you. You stop handing them pieces of your mind. You stop giving them sentences they can rearrange. You stop correcting every little misunderstanding, and suddenly, their behavior starts speaking louder than your words ever could. Silence has a strange way of revealing people. The person who genuinely cares will usually notice your distance and ask if you're okay. The person who only wanted control may become irritated because you are no longer responding the way they expected. The person who respected you will respect your space. The person who depended on your emotional reactions may keep pushing buttons just to see if they can still reach you. That's when you learn something uncomfortable. Sometimes people don't miss you. They miss their access to you. They don't miss your presence. They miss the attention. They don't miss your voice. They miss the ability to influence your emotions. And when that access disappears, their behavior becomes the confession they never intended to make. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to create a dramatic confrontation. You don't need to gather evidence and announce what you've discovered. Just watch. Watch what happens when you stop chasing. Watch what happens when you stop explaining. Watch what happens when you stop responding immediately. Watch who becomes respectful and who becomes desperate, because pressure reveals character, and silence creates pressure without you saying a word. People who are comfortable with your boundaries don't need to destroy them. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries often become uncomfortable when you finally develop some. That's why your silence can feel so strange to certain people. They were accustomed to having an emotional doorway into your life. They could knock, and you would open it. They could provoke you, and you would answer. They could disappear, return, criticize, compliment, confuse, and manipulate the conversation, and somehow you would still be there trying to make sense of it. Then one day, the door stays closed. No anger, no revenge, no performance, just silence. And suddenly, they have to sit with their own behavior. That's the part people don't always understand. Silence doesn't magically change people. It reveals what was already there. When you stop filling every uncomfortable moment with explanations, other people have to fill the space themselves, and what they choose to say or do becomes information. Maybe they apologize. Maybe they become aggressive. Maybe they pretend nothing happened. Maybe they start telling stories about why you changed. Maybe they suddenly become interested in your life again. Whatever happens, you don't have to chase the answer. Observe it. You are no longer participating in the experiment. You are watching the results. And there's a certain freedom in that. You stop needing everyone to understand your intentions. You stop needing every person to agree with your decisions. You stop treating every accusation like an emergency. You realize that your character doesn't collapse because someone misunderstood it. Your future doesn't disappear because someone doubted you. Your worth doesn't decrease because someone refuses to recognize it. Sometimes silence is simply the moment you stop arguing with somebody's version of you. Let them believe what they want. Let them create their theories. Let them discuss your distance. Let them wonder why you aren't reacting anymore. You have something more important to do. You have a life to build that doesn't require constant explanations. You have a mind to protect from unnecessary chaos. You have goals that cannot afford to be interrupted by every emotional disturbance. And the less you explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, the more energy you have left for the person you are becoming. There comes a moment when you realize you have spent too much of your life standing in front of people with evidence in your hands, trying to prove that you are not the person they decided you were. You explain, you clarify, you defend. You answer questions nobody had the right to ask. You try to correct every misunderstanding because somewhere inside you, you still believe that if you just find the perfect words, everyone will finally see the truth. But some people aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for something they can use against you. And that's the trap. You think you're defending yourself, but you're actually giving them more access to your mind. Every explanation becomes another opportunity for someone to challenge you. Every justification becomes another door they can walk through. Every attempt to prove yourself becomes another reason they expect you to keep proving yourself tomorrow. So eventually, you have to ask yourself a brutal question. Why am I trying so hard to convince someone who already made up their mind? That's where maturity begins. You stop defending every version of yourself, because people will remember an old mistake and use it as if you are still living inside it. They will remember who you were when you were insecure. They will remember the version of you that tolerated disrespect. They will remember the version that begged for attention. They will remember the version that reacted emotionally. And when you change, some of them won't update their picture of you. They will keep talking to the old version. Let them. You don't need to drag your present self back into your past, just to convince somebody that you've grown. Growth is strange like that. The people who knew you when you were struggling may become uncomfortable when you stop struggling in ways they understand. You become quieter, more selective, more patient, less desperate to be accepted. And suddenly someone says, "You've changed." Maybe you have. That's not automatically an accusation. Sometimes changing is exactly what needed to happen. You don't owe anyone permanent access to an outdated version of yourself. You are allowed to become wiser. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to recognize patterns you couldn't recognize before. You are allowed to walk away from conversations that only exist to pull you backward. And you are allowed to let your actions speak. Because eventually consistency becomes louder than an explanation. If someone thinks you're lazy, keep working. If someone thinks you're incapable, keep learning. If someone thinks you will always remain the same, keep evolving. Not to prove them wrong. That's still giving them control. Do it because your life is bigger than their opinion. That's the difference. When you live to prove people wrong, they still control your direction. Every decision becomes a response to them. Every achievement becomes a message to them. Every success becomes another attempt to make somebody regret underestimating you. But real freedom begins when you stop building your life around an audience. You don't need them watching. You don't need them clapping. You don't even need them to admit they were wrong. Let them misunderstand. Let them underestimate. Let them keep an outdated picture of you. You know what you're building. You know what you've survived. You know how many times you had to rebuild your confidence when nobody was watching. You know the nights you questioned yourself. You know the moments when you wanted to quit. You know how many times you swallowed your anger and kept moving. That history belongs to you. You don't need to turn it into a presentation for people who never cared enough to understand it. There is power in becoming comfortable with being misunderstood. Because once you stop fearing misunderstanding, manipulation loses one of its easiest weapons. Someone can accuse you. You don't have to panic. Someone can criticize you. You don't have to collapse. Someone can walk away. You don't have to chase. Someone can refuse to recognize your growth. You don't have to return to the person you used to be just so they feel comfortable around you. The moment you stop reacting automatically, something changes, not outside you, inside you. The same words can be thrown at you. The same disrespect can appear. The same person can try the same old tactics, but suddenly the result isn't the same because you are no longer giving your emotions the steering wheel. That is where real control begins. Not when you stop feeling. When you stop allowing every feeling to become an action. Anger can tell you something is wrong, but anger doesn't have to decide what you do next. Fear can warn you about danger, but fear doesn't have to write the entire story. Jealousy can reveal an insecurity, but jealousy doesn't have to become an accusation. Hurt can be real without becoming revenge. That's the difference between having emotions and being controlled by them. For a long time, you may have believed that reacting quickly meant you were strong. Someone says something disrespectful. You answer immediately. Someone ignores you, you demand an explanation. Someone criticizes you, you defend yourself. Someone tries to provoke you, you prove you can't be pushed around. But think about it. If someone can say 5 words and completely change your behavior, who is really controlling the situation? The person speaking or the person reacting? That's the uncomfortable question, because emotional control isn't about dominating another person. It's about refusing to surrender your internal state to another person's behavior. You don't have to become cold. You don't have to become emotionless. You don't have to pretend that nothing hurts. You simply create a space between what happens and what you choose to do about it. That space is where your power lies. Someone insults you. Pause. Someone sends a message designed to upset you. Pause. Someone tries to pull you into an argument. Pause. Not because you are scared, because you are thinking. And thinking is dangerous to manipulation, because manipulation depends on speed. It wants you emotional. It wants you defensive. It wants you responding before you've had time to understand what is happening. So slow down. Read the situation. Listen to the words. Notice the pattern. Ask yourself what outcome your reaction will create, because sometimes the response you want to give feels satisfying for 5 seconds and expensive for the next 5 days. You say something in anger. Now you have to explain it. You make a decision out of jealousy. Now you have to repair the damage. You send the message while emotional. Now you're staring at your phone wondering why you gave someone that much access to your peace. Control is knowing that you don't have to obey every impulse simply because it feels powerful in the moment. You can wait. You can breathe. You can walk away. You can answer tomorrow. You can decide that a conversation isn't worth having. And the strange part is that people begin treating you differently when they realize they can't easily move you. They might test you. They might push harder. They might say, "Why are you so quiet?" They may expect the old version of you to appear, but the old version isn't running the room anymore. You are, not because you became louder, because you became harder to manipulate. You stopped giving people immediate access to your emotional reactions. You stopped making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. You stopped confusing intensity with truth. And now you can observe situations instead of being swallowed by them. That's a different kind of strength, a quieter strength, a strength that doesn't need an audience. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need the final word. You don't need to prove that you are tougher. You need to remain capable of choosing your response when everything inside you wants to react. That is where discipline becomes visible. Anybody can be calm when nothing is happening. The real test is what happens when somebody presses the exact button they know will hurt. Can you still think? Can you still choose? Can you still protect your future from a temporary emotion? Because once you learn that, the game changes. People can still speak. They can still criticize. They can still misunderstand you. They can still try to provoke you. But they no longer get to decide what happens next. There is a strange kind of freedom that arrives when you stop needing everyone to understand you. For a long time, you may have believed that being misunderstood was something you had to fix immediately. Someone gets the wrong idea about you, and you rush to explain. Someone hears a distorted version of a story, and you try to correct it. Someone assumes your silence means weakness, and suddenly you feel the need to prove that it doesn't. You keep explaining because you think being understood will finally bring peace. But sometimes the explanation creates another argument, then another, and another. Suddenly, you're spending hours defending yourself to someone who isn't actually interested in understanding you. They're interested in winning their version of the story. That's when you have to step back. Let them misunderstand you. Not because you don't care about truth. Because you finally understand that truth doesn't need your panic. You don't have to chase every person who walks away with the wrong opinion of you. You don't have to run behind every rumor. You don't have to correct every assumption. You don't have to turn your entire life into a courtroom where you're constantly presenting evidence that you're a good person. People will interpret you through their own experiences. Some will see confidence and call it arrogance. Some will see boundaries and call them attitude. Some will see silence and call it weakness. Some will see distance and assume you are bitter. Some will see your growth and wonder why you suddenly became different. They are allowed to have their interpretation. You are allowed to keep living. That's the part they don't expect. They expect their opinion to become your emergency. They expect you to rush toward them with explanations. They expect you to prove that they are wrong. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you simply continue becoming better? What happens when you keep your focus instead of defending your image? Eventually, your behavior starts answering questions that words never could. You don't have to announce that you're disciplined. Your consistency shows it. You don't have to announce that you've changed. Your decisions show it. You don't have to announce that you've become stronger. Your boundaries show it. And you don't have to convince everyone that you have good intentions. The people who matter will recognize them through your actions. The people committed to misunderstanding you probably wouldn't believe you even if you explained yourself perfectly. So why keep performing for an audience that already decided the ending? Walk away from the need to be understood by everyone. There is peace in knowing that some people will never see the full picture. They weren't there when you struggled. They weren't there when you questioned yourself. They weren't there when you were rebuilding quietly. They saw one chapter and decided they understood the entire book. Let them. You know what happened between the lines. You know what it cost you to become who you are now, and you don't need to hand everyone the private details of your transformation. Some things can remain private. Some victories don't need announcements. Some lessons don't need explanations. Some doors can close without a speech. That doesn't make you mysterious. It makes you selective. Your attention is limited. Your energy is limited. Your time is limited. Why spend all of it trying to control what another person thinks? You can't. No matter how carefully you speak, someone can still misunderstand you. No matter how honest you are, someone can still question your intentions. No matter how loyal you are, someone can still rewrite the story. So stop trying to control the uncontrollable. Control your behavior. Control your choices. Control who gets access to your life. Control how much of yourself you give to conversations that produce nothing but exhaustion. And when somebody says, "Why don't you explain yourself anymore?" Maybe the answer isn't another explanation. Maybe the answer is simply continuing forward, because there is a point where explaining yourself becomes another form of chasing approval. And you didn't become stronger just to spend your life chasing approval. You became stronger so you could stand comfortably in your own decisions. So let them misunderstand. Let them create theories. Let them discuss your silence. Let them believe you are different. You don't have to correct every story. You only have to remain honest with yourself, while your life keeps moving beyond the people who were never willing to understand it. There is a difference between being silent because you are hurt and being silent because you have finally decided where your energy belongs. One is waiting for someone to notice. The other is moving forward without needing anyone to notice. That's the shift, because silence means very little if your entire life is still revolving around the person you stopped talking to. You can ignore someone for 3 days and still think about them every 3 minutes. You can stop replying while secretly checking whether they noticed. You can walk away from the conversation while constantly wondering what they are saying about you. That's not freedom. That's silence with strings attached. Real silence begins when you stop making your life a reaction to someone else's behavior. You stop checking whether they regret it. You stop wondering whether they are jealous. You stop waiting for an apology. You stop imagining the moment they finally realize what they lost. Because the moment your happiness depends on their realization, they still have a place in your mind. And you didn't walk away just to build a smaller prison inside your own head. You walked away because your attention became too valuable to waste. There comes a point where you have to stop asking, "How do I make them understand?" and start asking, "What am I building now?" That question changes everything. Your focus moves from their reaction to your direction, from their opinion to your progress, from their behavior to your discipline, from what happened yesterday to what you can create tomorrow. That's when silence becomes powerful. Not because silence magically hurts someone, not because ignoring people is some secret weapon, but because you stop allowing another person's behavior to determine the rhythm of your life. You wake up and work. You learn, you exercise, you create, you plan, you improve. You become more disciplined. You take care of the things you neglected while you were emotionally distracted, and slowly something happens. Your life becomes louder than your explanation. You don't need to tell anyone that you're moving forward. They can see it. You don't need to announce that you're stronger. Your decisions show it. You don't need to tell people you've changed. Your standards show it. And that's when your silence stops looking like withdrawal and starts looking like direction. You aren't disappearing. You're becoming occupied with something more important, your future. Some people will misunderstand your silence. They may think you're angry. They may think you're trying to punish them. They may think you're waiting for them to chase you. Let them think whatever they want. You don't need to turn your growth into a performance. The moment you start living just to make someone regret losing you, you're still living for them. That's not the goal. The goal is to become so focused on your own life that their reaction becomes irrelevant. You don't need revenge. You need progress. You don't need to prove a point. You need to build a life that feels peaceful when nobody is watching. And that requires discipline because moving forward isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks boring. It looks like putting your phone down. It looks like refusing to send the message. It looks like going back to work after an emotional day. It looks like choosing sleep instead of another night of overthinking. It looks like learning something new instead of checking what somebody else is doing. It looks like improving yourself without posting every step. Nobody applauds these moments, but these are the moments that rebuild you. You start realizing that peace doesn't always arrive with an apology. Sometimes peace arrives when you stop waiting for one. Closure doesn't always come from another person's explanation. Sometimes closure comes from your own decision to stop reopening the wound. And your silence becomes meaningful when it is no longer a message to them. It becomes a promise to yourself, a promise that you won't keep abandoning your future to revisit the same emotional battlefield. A promise that you won't keep explaining yourself to people who have no intention of understanding. A promise that your attention will no longer be available to every person who knows how to disturb it. So keep moving. Let your silence stay quiet. Let your work become visible. Let your discipline become undeniable. Let your life become so full of purpose that you no longer need to look backward to see who noticed you leave.